Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining me today for the premiere of this film, Russia Returns to Ukraine. First of all, I'd like to thank the venue here in southwest London, the ILEC Conference Centre, and I'd also like to thank everyone who's helped during this production, not least my production team, and also those who financially contributed as well. As you may have read, this will be a series of films, we hope, all being well, to investigate what I feel is the creeping Russian influence that's coming back into Ukraine. And this is a country that I care deeply about, and I think it's very important that we know the full knowledge of any of Russia's activities in Ukraine or indeed in Western society as a whole. Even the current gas crisis, of course, and petrol fuel crisis in the UK has been blamed by many, for at least in part, for Russia's involvement in hiking up prices. I was initially drawn to this kind of story when I learned news of the beating of a journalist just doing his job in Ukraine. It reminded me of the old days, pre the last revolution, when Yanik, as he was known, Viktor Yanukovych, the former president who was very strongly backed by and bolstered by Russia, chose to beat journalists either directly or with the help of so-called titushki, paid thugs that are still sadly quite a common sight in Ukraine at times today. Being a journalist myself, I've always found it important to try to protect freedom of speech and try to find out the truth about what has been happening. So I went to a city that's not visited by too many Westerners inside Ukraine, and a whole story unraveled. And it came at a time when Ukraine's president is supposedly trying to battle against the oligarchs and the so-called oligarchization of Ukraine.
Yeah, hi Sim. First question, why was the situation in Dnipro chosen as a topic of interest?
Okay, so I covered this just at the start, really. I was first tipped off about the beating of a journalist, and that was something, again, close to my heart. And I wanted to know more, wanted to know why it was happening. I hoped post-revolution in 2013-14 that we were past that sort of thing in Ukraine and it would become a more normal Western democracy. Thankfully, democracy still very much holds true. The last couple of elections have been completely fair and open, as all observers have said, unlike most of Ukraine's neighbours to the east, shall we say. But it was initially that beating that led me to want to know more. Then I found out, as we saw, about the pretty graphic footage. Some of it I was sent about the stall holders and the kiosk holders being beaten up and their livelihoods just being swept away. The tractors sent in to demolish zero notice, really. So that was what originally piqued my interest. And then when you delve a little deeper, you find the allegations about who is responsible. The municipal guard is supposed to be, as we've heard, paid by the taxpayers' money, and yet seems at times to be attacking the people of Dnipro. So one of those topics that just built and built, and in the end led pretty much to the whole documentary that you've just seen.
You mentioned about trying to get access and funding for more films in Ukraine. What are some of the next films in Ukraine going to be about?
I think I'm going to have to say wait and see. For those of you who didn't hear, what are the next films that we promised going to be about? Well, it's not exactly a promise. I'm hoping that something will come of it. I would like to investigate the other cities that I referred to there. Obviously, there are, for those Ukraine lovers and who know the country well, there are strong links between some of the characters featured here and Kharkiv in particular, or Kharkov as the Russians would say, in the far east of the country, and also in the south of the country, the beautiful, almost antiquated city of Odessa. There's been a lot said about this city. There's been a lot of trouble there. There was a catastrophic fire many years ago that post-revolution that Russians and Ukrainians still argue about to this day. So there's a hotbed of discontent, and my feeling is that a lot of this discontent has been fermented by Russia and Russian money, and I want to investigate what has happened there. We've probably maybe aware of the allegations that have been made about Russia supporting all sorts of different agencies and people in society just purely to sow discord, discontent, and we know that they have had a troll factory in St. Petersburg, just always trying to put people against each other, to just distribute fake news, to just criticize everything and make people think the opposite is true. The truth does not matter. It's just getting people to query the truth to Russia. And if they can divide people in the European Union, then they feel, I'm pretty sure, that they can bring down the whole European Union. I'm pretty sad that we left as a nation, but that's the way it is. But thankfully, the United Kingdom is still, on the whole, pretty strong against Russia and their nefarious actions.
Thanks, Tim. There's lots of investigations going on about Ukraine now. The last one was about the Pandora Papers. Why do you think that they are effective?
Okay, so lots of investigations going on, in case you didn't hear the question, and reference to the Pandora Papers. It remains to be seen whether these investigations are effective or not. One of the problems has always been in Ukraine whether some people are above justice, and we've kind of scratched on that here in the city of Dnipro. It really needs a concerted effort by the West to support real democracy, and that means supporting a fully independent judiciary to make sure that this is happening, to make sure that the loans that are made by the European Central Bank or by the IMF are tied into progress, which they have been so far, but this really does need careful policing, not just the cosmetic answers that can be given. We need to make sure that absolutely everything is being done to ensure real justice, real democracy, and that nobody is above the law.
And finally from me, Tim, during the West's cooperation with Ukraine, does it take into account the mistakes that it made in Afghanistan?
Okay, so we saw one person in the video talking about Afghanistan and making some comparisons. Obviously, there is a whole world away between what happened in Afghanistan, the horrible scenes we saw there, and what has happened in Ukraine. But we take a little microcosm of the situation that was reported by the political expert, that in Afghanistan, everything was concentrated on Kabul and the government, and people lost sight and didn't think it would have any effect what was happening in the regions. And it proved that what was happening in the regions where the Taliban got stronger and stronger and assumed more control was far stronger than the infrastructure that had been set up and developed in Kabul itself. And as we saw, the country capitulated, even against all advice and expectations, even from the intelligence communities of the US in particular, far, far quicker. Will the same happen in Ukraine? Well, we know the regions are strong and independent. Some of them still have the majority Russian language. We know that there are a lot of people that are still pro-Russian, whether they're paid or not, whether they genuinely believe that. Nobody's quite sure to what extent. Certainly a lot of people have families across the border, and the two countries should be able to live side by side and in peace, and both as independent nations. Sadly, that's still not happening. Remember, there are still Russian troops inside Ukraine. There are still Russian-backed separatists still really putting parts of the country, a large part of the country, and a large part of the manufacturing base out of commission for Ukraine, which obviously hits the annual turnover, the gross domestic numbers for Ukraine, and leads to more and more poverty in the country. So I think it's really important that Western beneficiaries and Western supporters, such as the United Kingdom, the US, and the EU, do acknowledge and understand the threat that can be posed from outside in the regions, because that's where a lot of the discontent is happening. And if you just concentrate on Kiev, sooner or later you'll find that the regions will overpower you, not least at the ballot box, which is the way that Russia is trying to influence things again at the moment. That's my belief. So I think that concludes the questions we've had in so far. As I said, I'll answer anything else on Twitter that I can do. And thank you once again for joining us for this live broadcast from London. I wish you a very good rest of the day. Thanks to the crew here and our hosts for putting this on, and look forward to, at some point in the future, coming back to you with the second of our investigations. But the only words that I can possibly finish with are to say, have a nice rest of the day, and Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, I have to say myself.